I have had 5 near-death experiences over the course of my life. I had 2 when I was a child, one at the age of 5 and one at the age of 11. But I didn't know those were near-death experiences, because as a child, you have no idea that floating out of your body is anything paranormal. I figured everybody experienced that. But now I realize I had 2 near-death experiences when I was a child and close to death. But my adult experiences, I've had 3 adult near-death experiences. And the one that really changed my life and started me on the path of researching spiritually transformative experiences was the plane crash near-death experience I had in 1979. I'm a medical doctor, and I trained in Canada, mostly in Toronto, Canada, Hamilton, Ottawa, various locations for my training. But I've always felt, looking back, that it was like spirit was training me spiritually while I was getting my medical training, preparing me for what eventually was going to be my medical specialty. I was the first Canadian doctor to specialize my practice in the counseling and research of people having near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative experiences. And how did spirit get me there in my spiritual training? By giving me experiences. And the near-death experience in 1979 happened when I was in a MedEvac plane, carrying a critically ill woman by airplane in northern Canada in the middle of winter. And that plane flew into bad weather and it crashed. And as the plane was going down, it was a twin propeller airplane, a small airplane. First one engine died, then the other engine died, and we were in a heavy winter blizzard storm. And so there was terrible turbulence. And as the engines died and we were going down, the plane was shaking with horrible turbulence. And I felt, I think as anybody would, intense fear and panic. This wave of fear and panic came over me. And I remember in my heart, it just sort of leapt out of my heart, God help, I'm going to die. And it seems that I suppose it was a prayer, was enough, because it was at that moment, actually before the plane crashed, that my near-death experience began. Because all of a sudden, this force field of peace started descending upon me, and it was pushing away all my fear. And I felt completely calm, unafraid. And then I heard an inner voice. And before this time, I'd never heard inner voices. And the inner voice said, "Be still and know that I am God. I am with you now and always." And with these words, this feeling of peace and the presence of the higher power got even stronger. And I was still totally alert. The plane hadn't crashed yet. I turned, and the patient beside me had regained consciousness, and she was looking at me sort of scared with her big eyes. And I remember I comforted her, "Don't worry, everything's going to be fine." Because somehow I knew in that mystical state of peace and calm that everything would be fine, whether we lived or whether we died. The pilot really, really heroically was trying to guide the crash landing, and he had pulled up the wheels so that he could do a belly landing onto the surface of a lake. Most of the lakes in the area were frozen, and unbelievably, he did manage to get us down on a belly landing, and we were skidding across the ice, and we would have been actually fine if the ice had been thick enough, but it wasn't. When the plane finally came to a stop, it quickly broke through the ice, nosedived, and sank into deep water. We had skidded right to the edge of open water. And I had to quickly get out of the plane, and I was trying to pull the patient out. I pulled the nurse out, was unable to get the patient out, and then the plane nosedived and went down.
And there I found myself in open water. This is the middle of winter in Canada. I was wearing heavy winter clothes, like a heavy winter coat and heavy boots. And in the water, they were just pulling me down like dead weights. And I heard a voice again in my mind say, swim to shore. Now, as I looked around me, to my left, towards the lake, there was ice, but I had no way to know how thick the ice was. And to my right, towards the closest shore, which was an island, it was about 200 yards, which is 200 meters of open water with a fast current. And it was the middle of the storm. And I remember mentally arguing with this voice. I wasn't used to higher guidance. This was all new to me. And I mentally argued with the voice. No, I'm not going to swim to shore. I took lifeguarding. They tell you don't swim to shore. It's too far. You're going to drown. So I ignored this voice. And the pilot was shouting, try to get on the ice. Try to get on the ice. So instead, I swam towards the ice and I started trying to get on the ice. But the ice was too thin. It couldn't even support the weight of my arms. And every time I tried to get on, I was getting more and more tired, more and more exhausted, and the ice would break beneath my arms. And then the voice in my head repeated, swim to shore. And finally, the third time the voice said, swim to shore, I finally surrendered. I shouted to the other two, the ice is too thin, we'll have to swim to shore. And I started trying to swim to shore. Now, it was a really long and a really difficult swim. And with all my winter clothes and that long distance, people say it's a miracle that I was able to swim that distance. Anyway, as I was swimming to shore, when I was part way to shore, I went under, my just from exhaustion and my throat filled with water, and I'd have to kick with all my strength until I could get my mouth above water and like cough that out and breathe again. And as I continued to swim, all of a sudden, my near-death experience deepened. And what happened was I heard this loud sort of roaring or whooshing noise, and I felt my consciousness lift up out of my body. And I found myself maybe 20 or 30 feet above my body looking down. Now, interestingly, I wasn't dead. My body down there was still alive and it was still swimming. It was actually like my consciousness was two places at the same time. And I compare it to like the split screen TV where you have the big image and the little image. It was like most of my consciousness, or the big image, was now above my body looking down. But the little image was a little bit of my consciousness was still in my body at the same time that was still struggling to swim to shore. But then my near-death experience deepened, because then I went to another realm. I went into this realm that was filled with light and filled with love. And I felt like I was home. It was the most incredible, powerful feeling of unconditional love that I had ever had. And while I was in this white light realm, it was this beautiful, diffused, soft, glistening light. It wasn't like glaring light. It's like when you're in the top of a cloud in an airplane, just before it breaks up into the sunny skies above the cloud, that's bright glistening. That's what it was like, glistening and soft and diffused. For a second, I saw a face of light, and then it sort of faded into the cloud-like periphery. And while I was in this place or state of consciousness, it's hard to know what to actually call it, I knew things, not because anybody told me, but somehow I just sort of knew in my soul or intuitively. I knew that this love that I was feeling was the love of a higher power, or what I had been raised to call God. But I was experiencing God totally different from what I had been raised that God was supposedly like. I was not seeing an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne judging me if I was good or bad. Instead, I was experiencing that the higher power was like this universal force field of love
that is infinitely intelligent and infinitely powerful and penetrating all of creation, all of past, present, future. And while I was in this mystical state of, shall we call it, communion in the light, that I also knew somehow that what I think of as me, would live on whether or not my body survived the drama that was happening below. So it really didn't matter to me whether the body lived or died. I went under another time and managed to come up again. And then I continued that small part of my consciousness that was still in my body, struggled to come to shore. And I was about to go down for the third time. And I remember it was as if the split screen split. And all of a sudden, the little bit was up in the light and most of it was back in my body. And I was about to go under for the third time. And I remember, it's amazing what you think in these situations. I remember thinking, oh, it's really true. You do die the third time you go down. And I was totally ready to surrender because I just had no more energy to swim. I was about maybe 20 feet from shore. And then through my body's physical eyes, I could see the current was carrying me very rapidly to the right. And down to the right, there was a tall pine tree that had fallen off, dead and fallen into the water, projecting from the island. And the current was carrying me right to it. And it actually looked to me when I was in that mystical state, like there was a hand of light superimposed on that tree, that it was like reaching out to me. And all I had to do was swim 2 more strokes and the current would carry me to the tree. So somehow, through the grace of God, I had the strength to swim those 2 strokes. I managed to grab the tree and then pull myself to shore. Now, I was freezing to death and hovering above my body. And just to make a long story short, if people want more details, I talk about them in my books. Touched by the Light is my most recent book, and my new book coming out this fall, Soul Lessons from the Light. I was freezing to death on that shore and needed to be rescued really, really quickly, or else I would be freezing to death. Now, there was a whole series of divine coincidences, I'll call them, or the grace of God, that led to my successful rescue. The pilot managed to swim to shore beside me. The nurse had managed to find a piece of wood that was frozen in some ice, so it was keeping her afloat. But the pilot and I, we had swum to an island that was not accessible by road. You couldn't get there by skidoo because there was open water next to the island, and you couldn't get there by boat because there was ice before the open water. So the only way you could possibly get to us was by helicopter. And normally there's no helicopter at all in that region. But by coincidence, by divine coincidence, on that day, on that time, there was a helicopter in the region. And it had just set down about 5 miles from where we had crashed. It had also come down because of the storm. It had interrupted its journey. But how would they know where we are and that we crashed? When the plane went down, the pilot of the plane radioed up a mayday message that we had crashed. And because it was hilly and because of the storm, the only way anyone could have picked up our mayday message was if there was a plane almost directly overhead. And guess what? Again, by divine coincidence, there was a big Air Canada plane almost directly overhead. They picked up the message that we had crashed. And so they, I guess on their emergency frequency or whatever, radioed down to the ground that they picked up this distress signal. And that helicopter that had landed 5 miles from us picked up that distress message from the Air Canada plane, and the pilot of that craft and had just met another pilot who was grounded. The 2 of them without even thinking about risk, they were risking their lives, got into the helicopter and started searching for us, knowing approximately where we had crashed, which was really a miracle because we would not have survived long in that cold weather. Again, cutting a long story short of all the details of the rescue, they did manage to find us. One of the pilots got out of the plane and sort of half dragged me, half carried me into the helicopter where I lost consciousness. I watched from above as they landed on the driveway of the nearby hospital, the closest hospital. People came out of the emergency department with their stretchers, and I was put on a stretcher and wheeled into the hospital. And finally, they realized they needed to reheat us and wheeled us to the hot whirlpool baths in the physiotherapy department. And when they put my body in the hot water to reheat me, that is what revived me. And it's there that my consciousness re-entered my body. And what it felt like was, you know, how they depict a genie being sucked into a bottle. It was like I was in this big space up above, and through the top of my head, I was like sucked back in. And suddenly I found myself completely back in my body. And I remember thinking, I'm back, I'm going to live. Well, this experience transformed me profoundly. Now, it came on the back of another experience I had about 3 years earlier, which was while I was still in medical school. I had taken a meditation course that they said if you did that, you could study more efficiently and get better marks in your exam. So I started meditating every day. And 3 months after I started meditating every day, I had a profound experience that I now know was a kundalini awakening. While I was meditating, I heard, again, like a loud roaring noise, and I felt this energy rush up my body, powerful energy, and I popped out of body and I expanded. And it's like I transformed into a force field of love. I now know that that was my first mystical experience, but it lasted till the end of my meditation, and then my consciousness contracted again. Now, I didn't know what that was, but it had already piqued my curiosity about spiritual experiences. But I was so busy focused on my medical studies and my exams and my internship and residency that I just sort of put it out of my mind and tried not to think about it. But this near-death experience, what I now know was a near-death experience in the plane crash in 1979. So I was finishing my medical residency. I was already a young doctor. These two things combined, it was so strong now. I couldn't ignore this anymore. It's like something's going on here. I'm having some sort of unusual experiences. I mean, after the plane crash experience that I now know was a near-death experience, a big change happened immediately in that when I first came back, it was like I brought some of the love with me. I was just filled with love. I was bubbling love. I remember I would look at the squirrels playing in my yard and I'd feel love for the squirrels. I'd look at children playing. I'd see love for the children. Music. Oh, I felt love, and I've had tears of joy whenever I listened to music. It was like I was drunk with love for the first little while. Good thing I had to be off work because of my frostbite in my hands, so I could go through this period of being drunk with love. And then another very interesting thing happened. A few weeks after this plane crash incident, the NDE, I had my first clairvoyant experience. I was driving at a stoplight. I stopped at a stoplight. I was going to visit a friend. And all of a sudden in my mind popped this very clear visual image of my friend's brain covered in pus. And as a doctor, I absolutely knew it symbolized meningitis. And somehow I knew it was my friend's brain. And sure enough, when I arrived at my friend's house a little while later, she was feeling sick. She had a bad headache. And guess what? Later on that day, she went to the emergency department and was diagnosed with meningitis. So now here I am, a young medical doctor. I'd had what I now know was a kundalini awakening. I had this profound experience in the plane crash, which I now know is a near-death experience. Then I'm starting to have psychic or clairvoyant experiences, because this was just the beginning. I started having more. I started having more clairvoyant experiences. I started having more clairsentient experiences. So this changed me in that I started living a double life. That on the outside world, I was this young medical doctor, and I started my medical career, and then I got a teaching position at the University of Toronto, and I had a traditional Western medical practice. But in my private life, in my secret in the closet life, I was an intense spiritual seeker and researching everything I could find about all types of spiritual and paranormal experiences, because I was having them. It was a huge struggle for me, as it is for many, many experiencers, to find an accurate name, even to call what happened to you. And so it was really difficult. I had to search years to find correct labels for what was happening to me. Because when I went to some meditation groups and asked about what I thought might have been a kundalini awakening, said, "Oh no, that's not possible. You're far too young. You have to be, it only happens if you're in the Himalayas, initiated by a guru, blah, blah, blah." So I thought, well, okay, it's not a kundalini awakening. What is it? But I started researching kundalini, researching mystical experiences, until I finally came to the point where I disagreed with these people. Is that, no, my experience matches what is described as a kundalini awakening. Similarly, with my near-death experience in the plane crash, when I first asked people what they thought it was, well, first off, the medical doctors I spoke to, they all called it a hallucination. Oh, it's hallucination because of a low blood sugar, or a hallucination because of the cold. And that just didn't resonate as true with me. It was such a positive, profoundly transforming spiritual experience etched in my memory. It was no hallucination. So I realized the medical profession would not give me an understanding of what was happening. And when I went to someone who was an expert on near-death experiences back in the 70s, they told me it wasn't a near-death experience either, because they said, "Did you see a tunnel?" And I said, "No, I never saw a tunnel." Were you dead? And I said, "Well, no, I was never clinically dead." Then they said, "Well, it's not a near-death experience." And I said, "Okay, it's not a near-death experience. Well, what is it then?" So this got me researching near-death experiences, mystical experiences, psychic experiences. And by the way, what that person told me was wrong, because you don't have to be clinically dead to have a near-death experience. I now know, after my many years of research, you can have one when you're facing death, when you're close to death. You can also have them when you're clinically dead and resuscitated. Anyway, so for years, it was a personal struggle trying to find words to describe accurately what happened to me, words that were not making it an illness or hallucination. And so as my research continued, I realized all of these experiences are connected, because I'm experiencing all of them. So they must be connected in some way. But back then in the 70s and the 80s and even the early 90s, the groups that were starting to research and talk about these spiritual and paranormal experiences were all focused on one type of experience. Like, there were several groups that were looking only at the near-death experience. Then there were some other groups that were looking only at mystical experiences. Then there were other groups that were looking only at psychic phenomenon. And then there were a few groups that were looking only at kundalini awakening. But I was experiencing all of them. So, and in my opinion, they were all connected. So there was a need to have a word that was an umbrella term that encompass the whole range of experiences. And that's how I came up with the term spiritually transformative experiences, because all of these experiences seem to be an expansion of our consciousness. But initially, I was really alone. I was the only person using this term, and I was the only person who was presenting that these experiences are related. I had found, as I was searching, I studied from many different sources. I looked at the psychological literature, because there were psychologists and doctors who wrote about it, like Richard Maurice Buck and Carl Jung, some very famous ones. And I looked in the mystical traditions. I looked in yoga. I looked in Buddhism. I looked in Christian mysticism, even Jewish Kabbalah, native traditions, to try and find a vocabulary and understanding. And the best that I found that resonated with me in terms of what I had experienced, and also I should mention that many people started coming to seek me out as patients in my medical practice, because they heard there's this doctor in Toronto you can speak to who's had some paranormal experiences herself, who won't automatically say you're crazy. So I now, over the years, was getting a lot of stories told to me. So I had not only what I was experiencing, what I was reading, but the stories now of hundreds of people who come to me in my medical practice to share their stories. And the model that fit the best for me was the yogic model of consciousness. And I was deeply influenced by Gopi Krishna, by the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and also by Paramahansa Yogananda. And in the yogic model, for those who are not familiar with it, it's understood that we're all growing spiritually, and our consciousness has the potential to expand and manifest a much broader range than what we normally experience. And with this spiritual awakening, there are different types of experiences or phenomena that will happen. And Patanjali wrote about it in great detail in the Yoga Sutras. But there are many types of mystical experiences, which are called samadhis in yoga, and then many types of psychic phenomenon, which are called siddhis in yoga. So that when I classified spiritually transformative experiences and tried to divide all these phenomena in a way that made sense, that people can understand, that two big categories. The first one is mystical experiences, which is samadhis. The second category is psychic phenomena, which is siddhis. Third phenomena, kundalini awakening, which is also understood in yoga. But when I looked in the other traditions, guess what? The other traditions have words for the spiritual energy too. They were just different. They might call it chi in Buddhism. They might call it Holy Spirit in Christianity, or Dumo fire, or the other terms in different traditions, holy wind. So I discovered, wow, people have known about this spiritual energy in the mystical traditions, but in yoga, they had a clear word for it, was kundalini awakening. There'd been so much focus on near-death experiences in North America that I added that as another category of STEs, but really what a near-death experience is a mystical experience or a psychic experience that happens when you're close to death. But I leave it as its own category. And then there's another category, which is the inspired creativity and genius with the downloads. And then finally, death-related STEs. So those are the sort of the categories I created. And it really came from me trying to have a framework that was positive for what I was experiencing and for what all these people who were coming to see me in my office were experiencing. And I found for many people that made all the difference in the world, just that I give them a word to call their experience. Let's say past life recall, which is a psychic phenomenon, which is known in yoga, that, oh, I'm not crazy. This happens to other people too. So, but I was alone with this concept that they were all connected in consciousness for many, many years, which was your question. And I'm absolutely delighted that within the last 5 years, there's been a change in awareness. And many of the foremost groups around the world that are looking at spiritual and paranormal experiences, many of them have adopted the term that I coined, and I'm very honored about this: spiritually transformative experiences. In 2019, when I was meditating one day, I had a strong download from Spirit, higher guidance from Spirit, which was to found a new worldwide organization focused on the whole range of spiritually transformative experiences. And I was even given the name for the organization: Spiritual Awakenings International. Now, if that's not enough, I had been talking with Robert Bear, a gentleman that I had just met a few months earlier, because we were both serving at that time on the board of directors of IANS, and we'd been nominated. I'd been nominated for president of IANS, and he'd been nominated for vice president. So I had phoned him up to say, hey, see if our values were compatible, see if we wanted to run as a slate in the election to run together. And when we were, he's a multiple NDE experiencer as well, and multiple STE experiencer, very intuitive. While we were on that phone call, which was the day before my download, or hours before actually, he got a download. So he actually got the download first. He said, Yvonne, I think we're meant to do something else. I just got a download that we're supposed to found another organization together. And of course, my response was, well, I hardly know you. So I'll have to meditate about this and I'll get back to you. But as soon as I meditated after that phone call, I got this very powerful download. So I called up Robert afterwards and says, well, my goodness, I told him, I think we are being called together to found Spiritual Awakenings International. So we both held it in our hearts. We're both deeply spiritual people, and we trusted that Spirit would guide us when and where. We didn't know when or where this would happen. Would it be in 5 years? Would it be in 10 years? But we both knew, because it was so strong, that we were being called by Spirit to start this new organization. Well, as it turned out, he and I were elected at the election. I was elected president of IANS. He was elected vice president. And we both served to the best of our capacity. But we both knew in our hearts this was not our destination. It was what we were doing now, but we were being called to do something else. Spirit made it clear to us when it was time to move on. So in the end of March 2020, we both resigned with sending lots of love and blessings from IANS, because we knew we were going to launch Spiritual Awakenings International. And then a short time after that, I got another download that actually gave me the date that Spiritual Awakenings International would launch, which was June 15th, 2020. And I had to work like crazy to get our website ready, to get everything set up to launch, our first event set up. Anyway, we did launch on June 15th, 2020. And our mission, which just builds on my work and my calling for my entire career, is to raise awareness globally of the whole range of spiritually transformative experiences. But also, in addition to that, to facilitate networking so that experiencers can meet each other, because so many experiencers feel isolated all over the world. No one to talk to, no one to believe them. That's what's happened to them. And then also we're a forum for sharing. So we have speaker events where people can learn about different types of spiritually transformative experiences. So raising awareness, networking, and sharing are the three objectives. And we're truly international. In just 2 years, people from 75 countries around the world have subscribed to Spiritual Awakenings International. And to me, and this is on every continent except Antarctica. We're still waiting for those penguin researchers, but at every other continent, people have joined. And
what that shows me is that this spiritual awakening and STEs, which is the short form for spiritually transformative experiences, are happening to people all over the world. People of all religions, people of all cultures, people of all backgrounds. It seems that this is a time of awakening on the planet. In Western societies anyway, near-death experiences is becoming a widely understood term. And what I think is that part of the divine plan, how it's perfectly unfolding, is that advances in technology and medical advances have actually helped this. Because even if you think about my near-death experience in the plane crash, if it weren't for the airplane and it weren't for the helicopter, I never would have had the experience. If it weren't for the airplane, I wouldn't have been in the crash. If it weren't for the helicopter, I never would have been rescued. And similarly, many people reporting near-death experiences are after cardiac arrest or heart attacks. And we now have defibrillators and drugs and all sorts of things that will bring people back from the dead when they've been clinically dead that simply were not available 50 or 100 years ago. So, and about 15% of those people do report a near-death experience with going out of body or into the light. Not everyone reports it, but a certain percentage do. So I think medical technology and technology in general is increasing the number of people who are having near-death experiences because people are surviving more. So they're coming back and more people are able to tell their story. So I think there are definitely more near-death experiences happening nowadays, but also with the other technology like books and the internet and people have more access to information. So people are learning about meditation. I mean, meditation was really unheard of, 70 years ago in North America. But now just about everybody's heard of meditation, whether it be through yoga or Buddhism or whatever. And anybody around the world can learn how to meditate. And meditation is a very strong trigger. My research has shown that meditation is a very strong trigger to all sorts of STEs, whether it be a kundalini awakening, mystical experience, psychic phenomenon. So with more and more people learning about meditation, more and more people practicing meditation, I think that's also causing an increase in people having spiritual awakenings, spiritually transformative experiences of various types. Spiritual Awakenings International is a safe harbor for experiencers. So many experiencers are out there are looking for a place that they feel that they fit, a place that they can feel that is home. And we strive to make Spiritual Awakenings International that a safe harbor for experiencers, because I am a multiple STE experiencer. The Vice President Robert Bear, the co-founder, is also a multiple STE experiencer. So we are by experiencers for experiencers. Our board of directors, everyone's a multiple STE experiencer. So it's a place where you fit if you're an experiencer yourself. And we also, of course, we are there for people who want to learn more, who have not yet had an experience, but want to learn more, that are exploring spiritually, where they can learn more about diverse spiritual experiences, spiritual paths. We offer 3 events per month right now, in addition to our incredibly beautiful website. The scene behind me is the homepage of our website, spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. There's a lot of information there about the various types of spiritually transformative experiences and their after effects, and how to have a balanced and healthy spiritual awakening. And we also list there the events that you can join. All of our events are online right now and free. And so you can register for our events. You can register for our mailing lists where you get announcements for the events. And we offer speaker events
and experiencer sharing circles where people can come together and share their experiences. And we offer these events both in English and in Spanish. To learn more, please go to our Spiritual Awakenings International website. We hope you enjoyed the Spiritual Awakenings International highlights on the AJ Parr YouTube channel. Spiritual Awakenings International hosts 3 live online events each month, focused on all types of spiritually transformative experiences, with both speaker events and experiencer sharing circles in English and in Spanish. To learn more, please go to our Spiritual Awakenings International YouTube channel and website. That is spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. We hope to see you there.
If you'd like to know some more about Dr. Kason and her 5 NDEs, check out this video.